Good evening. It's 7 o'clock on Friday the 16th of April, and this is Scotland at 7 on Broadcasting Scotland. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this evening I'm presenting the programme from Edinburgh. I'm lucky enough to be joined this evening by our guest, Stefan Hoggan-Radu. Stefan is a retired para-athlete and now swimming coach turned political activist. He is also an SNP candidate on the Mid-Scotland and Fife regional list for this year's Scottish election. Hello, Stefan, and how are you this evening?
Hello, I'm very good, thank you, Andrew. How are you?
I'm doing grand, thank you. We'll start this evening's programme with the regular coronavirus update. As of 2 p.m. today, a total of 1,875,410 people in Scotland have been tested through the NHS Scotland labs and the UK Government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 1,652,149 have been confirmed negative, and 223,261 have tested positive, meaning that there are 204 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. Not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There are 3 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The total number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus COVID-19 infection now stands at 7,640. This number includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 109 were in hospital last night, 18 of whom were in intensive care. And as of 8 a.m. today, 2,722,084 people had received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 688,761 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show 127,225 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, and that's an increase of 34 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just hospitals. Following on from that update, some of the relaxations to COVID restrictions, which had been brought forward because the data had shown continued progress on vaccination and on suppression of the virus, have come into force. From today, travel within Scotland for outdoor socialising, recreation and exercise is allowed. People must continue to stay local for other purposes, such as non-essential shopping, and public transport capacity will continue to be limited. Outdoor meetings in groups of up to 6 adults from up to 6 households will also be allowed from today, with under 12s not counting towards this limit. Socialising in homes is still not permitted. The First Minister has urged continued caution and she encouraged people to follow the facts advice to protect against any upsurge or resurgence of the virus in our community. And in other COVID news today, the discovery of an Indian COVID variant in the UK has been announced. The first of the 77 cases of the India variant of the coronavirus found in the UK were detected in specimens dating back to February. Yesterday, Public Health England revealed that 77 cases of a variant first detected in India, called B1617, had been found in the UK, with 73 cases in England and 4 cases in Scotland. It is currently designated a variant under investigation, but is worrying researchers as it contains 2 mutations that it is thought may help the virus to evade the body's immune responses. There are also concerns the variant may be more infectious than earlier forms of COVID-19. Dr. Simon Clark, an Associate Professor of Cellular Microbiology at the University of Reading, said that while there was yet to be proof to support such worries, there was anecdotal evidence from India. I think it is fair to say that this is a candidate for becoming a variant of concern pretty soon, he said. Now, we've covered 3 aspects of the pandemic there, Stefan: the improving update, the relaxation of some restrictions in Scotland, and the appearance of another variant, apparently both in England and Scotland. Now, I know that because you're campaigning, you'll be thinking about COVID a lot of the time at the moment, but What's your reaction to any or all three of these coronavirus stories this evening?
So yeah, my thoughts go out to everybody that's been affected by this again in the last few days. It's absolutely horrible, and I do think that this Indian variant is worrying. But I do believe that what we are going through at the moment, the restrictions that we are still facing, it's fantastic news that we've got some more freedom today. We can travel a little bit further to go for walks or to see people that we've not seen in a long time in a socially distant setting. But I do think that what we are doing, hopefully, will be able to stop any variant. Maybe not in its tracks, but at least long enough that we can get a handle on things. And I think that the Scottish Government has done a fantastic job so far of really keeping the virus low within Scotland.
Of course, and in thinking in particular about the relaxation of some of the restrictions that are upon us at the moment, what have you heard from people who you're talking to, not necessarily on the doorsteps, but with whom you're communicating just now whilst you're campaigning? What's the reaction been from people on the streets?
It's been fairly positive. I think people are still very scared, and I think that people will still naturally not go to see as many people as five at one time. However, I was actually having a conversation with my friends the other day, and we are actually very lucky that there is only six of us. So we were talking about how we can all go and meet up in the park fairly soon, socially distanced, to have lunch and just to see each other, because we've not been able to see each other since last summer. And a lot of people are going through the same or are in the same position, and it's been really hard, especially on people's mental health. So I am glad that we are slowly getting there, but I am also glad that it slowly it goes, and we'll get out of this.
Oh, well, we'll look forward to hearing news of the party of six in a park in Dunfermline sometime soon. But I completely get the point that you're making there. Thank you. So, in moving on to news from the Scottish election now, Nicola Sturgeon has set out plans to abolish dental charges. The leader of the SNP has today reaffirmed their manifesto commitment to an NHS which is free at the point of need by setting out plans to scrap NHS dentistry charges in Scotland, and will pledge to work with dentists to create a sustainable, long-term funding arrangement for that profession. The SNP manifesto, published yesterday, contained an ambitious plan to remobilise the NHS after the pandemic, with a 20% increase in frontline NHS spending. With prescription charges already abolished by the SNP, as well as charges for hospital parking at NHS sites, the last remaining service for which people are routinely charged is dentistry. Ms Sturgeon confirmed today that, if the SNP is re-elected, all NHS dentistry charges will be scrapped over the next Parliament, starting with care-experienced young people. Removing these charges will cost around £75 million, estimated to increase to £100 million based on the additional uptake which the SNP expects and hopes will occur as a result of the cost being removed. Now, Stefan, further development of our Scottish NHS seems to be a plank of the manifesto that was launched yesterday. How important is this commitment to end charges for dental treatment?
Words can't describe how important it is, to be honest, and especially starting with the care experienced young people who have been even more isolated than the rest of us over the last 12 to 13 months. I think talking about dental charges, we need to think about how great it was when prescription charges were lifted. People weren't afraid to go to the doctors as much because they would have to pay this massive fee. I think it was £9 and then reduced until it was free. But £9 is a lot of money for some people, and if we can get to a point where more people can go to the dentist, and without that worry of having to pay money at the end of that's massive for a lot of people. And I think that where we are going as a country, especially with regards to the NHS, is hugely important, because if you look at the last 13 months, now the NHS in Scotland is the best funded NHS within the UK, but it could be better funded. The SNP is going further in these manifesto pledges to make sure that we do have an even better performing NHS. We need to get to a point where people, when they have issues, they are not stopped, or health issues, I should say, they're not stopped by financial barriers. And that's why this is so important for especially the people that earn the least in society.
That's of course, Stefan, and a couple of interesting points that you make there. The focus on care experienced young people that we're picking up in this manifesto. Can you think of other aspects in the manifesto where they have been or they should be focused upon as an important part of our society, and a part of our society which, as you say, have suffered particularly during the pandemic?
Yeah, so often care experienced young people, they don't get to go out. But if we're forgetting about COVID for a second, even prior to COVID, these people tend to be people that they don't get to go out and socialise as much. They don't have as much free time because they've got to go home after school or college or university and make sure that they're looking after either somebody else, or they've experienced care within their lives. And I think that we need to make sure that these people are looked after. And I think starting with them shows that we care, and hopefully we'll be able to go even further quicker with regards to the dentistry.
That's an interesting point that you make, Stefan. We've certainly picked up since the SNP manifesto was launched yesterday that there does appear perhaps to be a caring agenda as one facet of that manifesto, and what you're talking about here, I think, is almost caring for the carers, which is an aspect that we've seen both in terms of professional or full-time paid carers, but also, as you say, care experienced young people who look after family members or others as a matter of obligation rather than as a matter of employment. There are the thinking of the way in which the manifesto is bound together by issues such as caring for carers, or that it is a caring manifesto. Are there other aspects of the health components of the manifesto which particularly stand out for you?
Well, 20% increase in frontline spending, that's £2.5 billion over the course of the next Parliament for the NHS in Scotland. I believe that will make a huge difference. Hopefully we'll be able to go even further after that, but 2.5 billion is a lot of money. 20% of the NHS budget is a lot of money. And I think that doing these things, so the increasing of the spending, getting rid of the dentistry charges, these are just small things that can make a huge difference to people. Now, if you take we'll go back to talk about the dentists and the dentist fees. We're in a position where we can do this, and we are not an independent country yet, and we can afford to do this. The SNP's manifesto is completely costed, and we can afford to do this. Imagine what we could achieve in an independent country. In Scotland, you will never see any part of the NHS getting privatised. Unfortunately, we're down south, and I think that keeping the NHS free at the point of charge in public hands is extremely important. And I'm glad to see that the SNP in the manifesto has pledged to keep it in public hands for as long as we are in government.
Of course. Now, thinking again of the caring aspect of the manifesto, there was also an SNP mini manifesto today for disabled people. Now, given that this is an area in which you campaign outside of elections, what in that mini manifesto document is most important to you?
Do you know what? being somebody who was born with a disability, is being somebody who has gone through a lot of bullying because of disability in my life. A lot of bullying in my life because of my disability. Sorry. It's fantastic to see that we have a mini manifesto for people with disabilities. However, what I am very happy to see is the fact that actually disability is kind of a golden thread throughout the whole of the manifesto. And I think that's important. We shouldn't be a sidelined group where we have pledges just for disabled people. It's important, and I'm glad that we've gone and done it. But I'm even more glad that we have that golden thread going through the manifesto, because you talk about things like health. We need somebody to know what disabled people are going through with regards to health in government. We need somebody, the rural agenda, the business agenda. I could go on. We need people in government to know how these things affect disabled people, and I think that is really powerful.
And as a result, you're pretty confident that that golden thread through the manifesto this year is present, and maybe reflects a broader or a wider or a more inclusive thinking in terms of coming up with a manifesto.
Yeah, 100%. You just have to look at the candidates that the SNP have put forward at this election. There is more disabled, more BAME, more LGBT, more women than ever before. And I'm really, really proud of our party for that.
Thanks, Stefan. Now, elsewhere in the election, the Scottish Greens have pledged to establish new ferry links to Europe to offer low-carbon alternatives for passengers and freight. Working with CalMac, the party would create publicly owned services to continental Europe from places such as Rosyth, which had Scotland's only direct ferry link to continental Europe until around 2008. Brexit has caused significant tailbacks at English ports, whilst new ferry routes are being established between Ireland and Europe. As well as establishing new links from Scotland, establishing new routes would provide an alternative to flying. Now, Stefan, you're standing as a candidate on the Mid-Scotland and Fife list in this election. What's your reaction to this plan by the Scottish Greens to establish a low-carbon ferry route from Rosyth?
Yeah, I think these are ambitious and very interesting proposals, and something that if the SNP are re-elected, we will endeavour to work with every and all parties to make sure that we achieve our climate emission goals, or reducing our goals. The Greens are really, really good at talking about these issues. However, we are the party in the SNP that have been able to put forward so many ambitious targets, and we've been able to hit them. 98% of our electricity last year was from renewable energy. Douglas Chapman, who is the MP for Dunfermline and West Fife, has been doing a lot of work on this, as well as Annabel Ewing, who is the MSP for Rosyth.
Well, that's fantastic. We look forward to seeing ferries travelling back and forth from Rosyth to continental Europe again. Certainly I can remember the services which were unfortunately withdrawn. But we look forward to hearing more of the developments, both in terms of our communications and also in terms of the green agenda for our economy. Meanwhile, the SNP has said that Sir Keir Starmer is out of touch with Scotland and his own party members, as polling reveals that a clear majority of UK Labour Party members back an independence referendum. The most recent polling by YouGov reveals 60% of Labour Party members support a referendum on Scottish independence in the next few years, and that rises to two-thirds, 67%, of those expressing any opinion. In the poll, 31%, nearly 1 in 3, UK Labour Party members think that Scotland should become an independent country. Commenting, the SNP Deputy Leader, Keith Brown MSP, said, Keir Starmer is completely out of touch with Scotland and his own party members, who overwhelmingly support Scotland's right to choose our own future in a post-pandemic independence referendum. The Labour Party ruined its reputation in Scotland by backing Boris Johnson's hard Brexit, supporting austerity cuts, imposing trident nuclear weapons, and working hand in hand with the Tories in Better Together. It risks falling into terminal decline if it continues to side with Boris Johnson to deny democracy. Now, Stefan, we've spoken already about how you're standing for election for Mid Scotland and Fife, and of course we know that some of the big beasts of the UK Labour Party have close connections with Dunfermline and with Fife as well. But putting that to one side for a moment, what strikes you most about this polling of UK Labour Party members?
Probably the fact that it doesn't surprise me at all, to be honest. Not supporting Scottish independence is completely legitimate. If you do not believe Scotland should be an independent country, that is a very legitimate point of view. However, what is not a legitimate point of view is that to say that Scotland should not be allowed to have a referendum. We, the people of Scotland, should be deciding whether or not we have a referendum, not Boris Johnson, not Keir Starmer, and no party that is in government in Westminster. It should be down to the Scottish people to decide our own future.
You're probably closest in terms of geography at the moment. Have you detected any rumblings that the former Prime Minister is being reactivated to offer Scotland a vow, or to in some way suggest that people of Scotland shouldn't have the right to determine their own future?
To be honest, when Gordon Brown comes out and speaks on telly, I think most of the time he's doing the SNP a favour, and doing certainly the Scottish independence cause a huge favour. People in Scotland used to admire and look up to Gordon Brown, but unfortunately when he sided with the Tories and stood next to him, promising us all these things if we voted no in 2014, and when it all turned out to be lies, people didn't forgive him, and I don't think they have forgiven him yet.
So, notwithstanding whether people are forgiving Gordon Brown, do you also think? What do you think? Might this polling today? Do you think it does show that Keir Starmer is out of touch? Yes,
definitely. I think he is out of touch. I think that he should speak to the people in Scotland. It's just like Boris Johnson. When Boris Johnson came up to Scotland, he seen a very select few people in a business and didn't actually see real people. Keir Starmer needs to do the same, and he needs to speak to the Scottish Labour members, because Scottish Labour members want an independence referendum, or think that we should have one, regardless of or whether or not they actually believe Scotland should be an independent country.
Of course. Now, returning to the Scottish election campaign, following a visit to the Jamesfield Garden Centre in Perth with local candidate Jim Fairley, John Swinney has said that the SNP will take ambitious action to transform Scotland's rural economy if re-elected, after the Tories' hard Brexit dealt it a devastating blow. Jim Fairley, a former hill farmer and the SNP candidate for the constituency of Perthshire South and Kinrossshire, has said that keeping people on the land, spending locally, and producing more of our own food, sustainably and with nature, will be a top priority for the party, and it will take the following action to support this. It will roll out more mobile health services and create new centres of excellence for rural and remote medicine and social care to provide expertise and advice on the delivery of care in different rural, island and remote settings in Scotland, and also invest in our rural general hospitals. It will support more communities to benefit from community wealth building, where public services are required to spend in their local communities through increased local procurement, greater use of small businesses, and ensuring taxpayers' money is reinvested as far as possible in their local communities. It will develop a national digital academy and give every pupil a laptop or tablet with free internet access to allow learners to access education, regardless of circumstances or location. It will champion our rural and island communities by creating a Rural Entrepreneur Fund, renewing the Community Empowerment Act, introducing new land reform legislation with a presumption in favour of community buyouts, and invest £10 million into the Scotland Loves Local Fund to revitalise high streets. It will improve connectivity by reinstating or developing new railway branch lines across rural Scotland, invest £500 million in bus infrastructure, and ensure the road network in all parts of Scotland supports electric vehicles. And it will create a new £15 million fund to support food processing and manufacture, to develop local supply chains, and transition to low or zero carbon operations. Now, Stefan, Jim and John Swinney have set out a broad plan for the rural economy there. What do you think are the top priorities?
I think that the fact that we're going to create a £20 million Rural Entrepreneur Fund, which will provide grants of up to £10,000 to support the relocation or creation of 20,000 new businesses, is extremely important. I think if COVID has taught us anything, it's taught us that our businesses don't need to be in the centre of big cities to thrive. People can work from home, or they can have hubs in rural areas, which is really important for the economies of those areas. The majority of Mid-Scotland and Fife is a rural area. And from what Jim and John were saying, I think that my favourite part of all of this is the fact that we're going to provide laptops or tablets to every school child that needs them, because that will really help with the attainment gap, and it will really help help these children to thrive and get the best out of what they can truly achieve.
That's a good point that you make. I've been reflecting on that a little bit, thinking of the rollout of both computing devices and broadband to parts of the Western Isles. I certainly recall that children on Jura were not that impressed when the broadband and the devices were rolled out, because it meant that they could no longer have snow days. No matter how bad the weather was, they were always at school and they were always learning, which I'm sure is to their benefit, but I don't think they were particularly impressed themselves at the time. But thinking of that, thinking of voters and thinking of people who live and work in the rural parts of Mid-Scotland and Fife and other rural locations across our country, are there any other aspects of the broad plan that Jim and John set out today that you think voters will find exciting?
Do you know what? I think that the laptops and tablets for young people is probably the thing I'm hearing the most that is going to make the biggest difference. Laptops and tablets are really expensive. Not a lot of places, especially in the north part of Mid-Scotland and Fife, have fantastic broadband. So if we can get these young people connected to good, fast broadband with a decent tablet or laptop, so they can not just do their schoolwork, but to be able to socialise, especially in times like this. Hopefully COVID will be over soon, and we'll be able to go out and see people face to face. However, I think it's more evident than ever now that staying connected with people online is really important, especially for people's mental health. And I think that is a really important point that I've been hearing a lot from constituents that means the most to them.
Of course. Indeed, and one other aspect. Speaking personally, I can think of the reduction that we've seen over the past 50 years in the rail network in Scotland. In particular, some of the lines that were retained, and I'm thinking in Fife, for example, in Mid-Scotland, lines that were only retained in order to carry coal to power stations or as for goods. Do you think that there is a prospect of the redevelopment and the reintroduction of rail transport across Mid-Scotland and Fife?
I think so, yes, and I'm really, really happy that we have pledged to take ScotRail back into public hands if re-elected at this election. We need better public transport in this country, and especially rail. I can actually see out my window here in Dunfermline a railway line that has not used in years, that links Dunfermline and Rosyth to Alloa and Stirling, and that would be a phenomenal link to have. We need to have that kind of infrastructure. My worry is that we are not going to have control over Network Rail, who do a lot of the maintenance on the line. That will still be reserved to Westminster. I hope that can be devolved as soon as possible, prior to us voting for independence and us being able to control it ourselves anyway. Railway links are opening slowly. The SNP have been able to invest money and get lines reopened. You just have to look at the line that goes into the East Neuk that links to Leven. That is a phenomenal line which will do wonders for the East Neuk of Fife. But we really need to go even further and open up even more lines. You see them all over the place, especially in Fife, where the coal mines were, and we really need to open more of them up. I remember actually just at Christmas, my grandma showed me a book of all the tram lines that there used to be linking Dunfermline, Lochgelly, Cardenden. We need to go back to that type of transport, zero emissions, clean transport.
Absolutely, and I'm thinking your point about the former rail network and the industrial rail network that Scotland had, and which was largely dismantled. A return to using that, and using that in a green manner sounds like something that voters and electors will support and would value. Leaving the Scottish election now, we turn to news that an NHS contract has been handed to Matt Hancock's sister. A report from the Health Service Journal found that Mr Hancock holds at least a 15% share in a company called Topwood Limited, which has won 2 NHS Wales contracts worth £150,000. The report also found that they had been in line for health contracts in England, securing a place on the NHS Shared Business Services framework for confidential waste destruction and disposal, and that was just months after the Health Secretary took up the role. However, there is no current suggestion that Mr Hancock signed that contract. The news came after former Prime Minister David Cameron was found to have lobbied the Chancellor and Health Secretary, as well as senior government officials, to try and secure access for Greensill Capital to taxpayer-funded COVID loan schemes. The SNP's Deputy Westminster leader, Kirsten Oswald MP, has said that the UK Tory government continues to reek of corruption and cronyism following the revelations of the NHS contract being handed to a company owned by Health Secretary Matt Hancock's sister, a company he himself has a stake in. Now, turning first of all, Stefan, to thinking about the health sector aspects of this, I know that you're working in the health sector yourself at the moment. What's your reaction to more news of contracts during the time of pandemic being handed out to friends and family of Tory ministers?
Sadly, it doesn't surprise me. I think that we have seen this time and time again in the last 18 months, that the Tories are making money out of this pandemic, and it is utterly shameful. I think that Kirsten put it absolutely, hit the nail on the head. Another day, another scandal at the heart of the Tory government. I think that we need to get away from this cronyism. It was just like David Cameron, and David Cameron pledged to get rid of the constant barrage of stuff that was going on, and he's now doing it. He's now lobbying these ministers, even though he was the one that pledged to get rid of it. It's total hypocrisy, and it stinks, and that's typical Tory behaviour, unfortunately.
Now, that's a very good point that you make. We've had news over several days this week of the behaviour of senior Tories and ministers. More generally, what do you think's going on here?
I wish we all knew. What I think is happening is that the Tory government is trying to cover up the fact that people are now very aware of the dodgy dealings that they're doing, whether that be contracts, whether that be lobbying, whether that be paying to have access to the Prime Minister. Nobody should ever pay to have access to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister's office should be above all of that, and it's unbelievable that it's still going on in 2021.
I'm sure there must be something in this. The point about dental treatment in Scotland being free, but access to political leaders in Westminster not being free or not being fair. I'm sure there must be a message in there somewhere. But thank you for your thoughts on that. I have a suspicion that we will be returning to this story more than once over the coming weeks. I suspect that you're probably too young to remember the dog days of John Major's Conservative government as it descended into what was widely regarded as a mire of corruption and sleaze from which it couldn't escape. Do you think that we're starting to see the reappearance of that as a fundamental problem for the Westminster government?
Yeah, so you just have to look, it's a tale of two governments. If you look north of the border, the SNP Scottish government, been in power 14 years, look at what we've achieved. Look at how popular the SNP still are in Scotland. Look at all the things that we have done to make Scotland a better, more inclusive country. Then you look at Westminster. The Tories have been in government for 10, 11 years now, and what have they achieved? They've dragged Scotland out of Europe against our will. They have had corruptions, allegations against, I've lost count of how many of their ministers, and none of them resign. Boris Johnson has actually been convicted of breaking the ministerial code. Nobody was batting an eyelid to ask him to resign. Nicola Sturgeon was only alleged to have, and then was proven not to have broken the ministerial code. And everybody was wanting Tory Westminster, Tories in Westminster, Tories in Scotland. They all wanted her head on the table.
And do you think that's a demonstration of double standards between Westminster and Holyrood?
Sorry, I missed that. Siri started speaking to me for some reason.
That's no problem. And do you think that distinction that you've drawn, does that show does that show a distinction between the behaviour of politicians in Westminster and the behaviour of politicians at Holyrood, or does it reflect different expectations from voters, perhaps? That voters in Westminster voters they appear perhaps to be happy or accepting of that kind of behaviour, whereas voters for Holyrood are not.
I think it's voters in Scotland and voters in England. We are two different countries who vote differently because we have huge issues in Scotland that don't affect England and vice versa. We vote differently because we are different countries. Scotland is a very left-leaning country. And I actually found a very interesting article the other day that actually said that Scotland is the only country in Europe where the centre-right party have no chance of forming the government. And that just shows you how progressive and open we are in Scotland. And I think that's really what it comes down to.
I think that's a very interesting point. I certainly became aware this morning of polling, very early polling for the French presidential elections, and it was only one poll, but it showed Marine Le Pen being far ahead of Macron in polling, especially amongst younger voters, which came as quite a surprise. So we're maybe not suggesting Scottish exceptionalism, but we're maybe suggesting that Scots have different priorities or have priority or are focused on other things. Do you think?
Yeah, and it's not about Scottish exceptionalism. We don't want independence because we think we're better than any other country. We want independence because we believe that we are the same and we deserve the opportunities that every other independent country have, which we don't currently have, being part of the union that we are currently in.
Now, it's interesting. You touched when you were speaking there. You touched on Brexit and the effect of Brexit on the people of Scotland, and the European Union today said that the UK should not change trading rules in Northern Ireland on its own, and that the EU would continue its legal case over unilateral British action in the province for as long as necessary. The European Commission Vice President, Maroš Šefčovič, who hosted UK negotiator David Frost for talks yesterday evening, said only agreements by joint bodies established by the Brexit divorce deal could provide stability in Northern Ireland. The British-ruled province has remained in the EU single market for goods since Brexit to ensure an open border with EU member Ireland, and so requires checks on goods coming from other parts of the United Kingdom into the north of Ireland. In March, the UK government unilaterally extended a grace period on certain checks to minimise supply disruption, a move that Brussels said breached the Brexit divorce deal known as the Withdrawal Agreement and the specific protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland. In a statement today, Šefčovič said that there was no space for unilateral action. He said both sides had to agree on how to comply fully with the protocol, including clear endpoints, deadlines, milestones, and the means to measure progress. Now, Stefan, do you think that this news of continued legal action by the EU tells us anything about the state of relations between Westminster and Brussels at the moment?
I think it probably tells us that the EU don't trust Boris Johnson. We've all seen that Boris Johnson is very open to break international law, going back on promises and treaties that they've signed in this reckless Brexit negotiations. We are in a position where Northern Ireland and Ireland are on one island. Part of the island is in the EU, part of the island is not in the EU. Now, that would be fine in most other places. However, we all know the history of Northern Ireland and the dark days of the Troubles, and we don't want to return to that. However, Boris Johnson and the Westminster Tory government are jeopardising the peace deal in Northern Ireland for their own personal gain, and I think it's reckless, and I think that's probably what it tells us the most about.
Yes, how do you see events developing in Northern Ireland after what were several days of street violence last week?
I hope that all parties can get together and talk about what's happened and make a plan for going forward. Boris Johnson and the Westminster government need to talk to the EU. There needs to be a very good dialogue between the two, the British and the Irish governments as well, to be able to sit down and make sure that we don't return to the troubles of the past, and that Brexit is not going to affect Northern Ireland to the detriment of its people.
Do you think that Westminster ministers and Westminster Tory ministers, do you think that they share your hopes and your wishes for Northern Ireland?
I would hope they do. However, their actions are not saying that they do. They need to go a lot further to be able to ensure confidence in Northern Ireland and make sure that the people of Northern Ireland ultimately decide what's happening there.
Yes, of course, there is perhaps an interesting read across there, as I understand it, from the Good Friday Agreement and the other treaties that affect Northern Ireland at the moment. The people of Northern Ireland do have the opportunity to express a wish for self-determination every generation or every 7 years. I think the Good Friday Agreement says. It's interesting that perhaps the people of Northern Ireland voted to remain in the in the EU and in particular in the single market for goods, and that is what they have obtained. And they have a right to vote for self-determination embedded and enshrined in international treaties, two things which the people of Scotland don't seem to have had the opportunity to enjoy.
Yeah, the Northern Ireland treaties and whether or not the unification of Ireland is down to the people of Northern Ireland, and I don't think anybody outside Ireland should be telling Northern Ireland what they should and shouldn't be doing. That's up to them. And yes, I completely agree. Scotland has not been given the same opportunities. Scotland is the only part of the UK that hasn't had what they voted for within the Brexit negotiations. Scotland voted to remain. Northern Ireland voted to remain, and they've had some things done so that they are more in line with the EU. Why couldn't that have been done for Scotland? Because Boris Johnson and the Tory government and the negotiators didn't listen to what the people of Scotland wanted. They didn't listen to Nicola Sturgeon or to the SNP Scottish Government when they put forward proposals to keep Scotland within the single market. And that's just typical of this union, and we're not listened to.
Yes, of course. Now, moving now to news from the United States. The latest mass shooting has claimed 8 victims at an Indianapolis FedEx facility. At least 8 people have been shot dead at a FedEx facility in Indianapolis, and the suspected gunman has killed himself, police say. Multiple other people were injured and went to local hospitals, a police spokesperson, Janae Cook, said at an early morning news conference on Friday. At least 4 people were admitted to hospital, including one with critical injuries. 2 others were treated at the scene and released. No law enforcement officers were injured. We're still trying to ascertain the exact reason and cause for this incident, Cook said. Some family members said employees at the FedEx facility were not allowed to keep their phones with them while working, making it difficult to contact them. Now, Stefan, we're a little over a month past the 25th anniversary of the Dunblane tragedy, the UK's worst mass shooting. 25 years later, and these events continue to be a regular feature of terrible news from the United States. Do you think that there is any sign of the beginning of an answer to these atrocities in the US?
No, unfortunately, I don't. I was Googling this story because I'd seen the headlines, but I didn't know very much about it, and I couldn't find it. And the reason that I couldn't find it easily was because it was hidden amongst numerous mass shootings that happen on a weekly basis in the US. And it's just shocking. They really need to get a handle on it. After Dunblane, the government in the UK changed the law and made it harder, and we've not, thankfully, had another mass shooting in the UK to the degree of Dunblane ever since.
That's a good point. I was going to ask you, do you think that there are any lessons which Scotland can continue to learn? I'm thinking in particular of the criticism of the restriction on gun ownership, which you just mentioned. Those restrictions were introduced after the Dunblane tragedy, and those were restrictions which politicians like Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage have criticised.
Yeah, but if you look at the statistics, even just Europe versus the US, we have very little mass shootings in Europe because we have very little guns. Farmers have guns, and the people who do need guns can get a license for a gun. People don't need guns. There's a reason that the police in this country don't carry guns, because they're not fighting people with guns. The more guns that you have someplace, the more dangerous it is. And I stand by the belief that a house with a gun in it is a much more dangerous place than a house with no guns.
That's maybe something that our friends in New Zealand, after the atrocity there last year, have learned as well, with their almost, I think, immediate banning of high-powered and assault weapons, for which it was recognised there was no real need, even and in a community which is even more rural and agricultural than our own. But moving on for a moment, the preparations for a vital UN climate talks, which are planned to take place in Glasgow this year, are set to intensify next month after nations compromised over how to conduct virtual negotiations ahead of the summit. The climate talks, called COP26, are set for November, after being postponed for a year owing to the coronavirus pandemic. The summit is viewed as one of the last chances to put the world on track to fulfill the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement and to tackle the climate emergency. On Thursday night, the decision-making body of COP26, made up of the UN, the UK, and representatives of developing and developed countries, ruled that governments should hold a 3-week-long virtual meeting from 31st of May to the 17th of June to begin negotiations and to hammer out agreements on key aspects of the talks. But countries will still have to wait until they meet in person to rubber stamp any decisions. The question of whether formal negotiations under the Paris Agreement should take place online has been a vexed one since the decision was taken last May to postpone the COP26 summit for a year. Now, firstly, Stefan, what is your overall reaction to the ongoing discussions and to the idea that a conference which may be so important to the world as COP26 may eventually come to Glasgow and be held in Scotland before the end of this year?
I think it's fantastic that Scotland's hosting this conference. However, I think also that it doesn't matter where it's being held. It matters what is discussed and what is decided. The world is on fire and we're running out of time. It's going to be my children, grandchildren that are affected by this. And actually, it's going to be me as well. I'm only 28. They're talking about sea levels rising by up to 5 meters by the end of the century. Theoretically, I could still be alive by then. And do you know what? I don't want to see our world, our beautiful world, burn. And that is essentially what is happening. We need to be in a position where we can make these decisions and make them quickly. That's why I'm very excited that they have agreed, that the countries have compromised and agreed to meet virtually for 3 weeks next month to decide this and to make plans, because the sooner we do this, the more chance we've got of stopping the world burning.
Now, there at the moment, it appears that there are no final agreements and no final decisions on the shape of the conference and whether it should go ahead in person. I think it's the case that Greta Thunberg has questioned whether it should be an in-person conference, for example. What do you think should happen?
I think in-person conferences are always better. There can be conversations that are around the table, conversations that aren't around the table, conversations over dinner that can't be done online. Take this setup that we have just now, for instance. We would normally, if I was in a studio with you, I would come and I would speak to you beforehand, then we would have it, and then afterwards we would maybe talk about other things, and information might come out and agreements might be made that wouldn't necessarily, or will not, because once this is over, we'll end the call and we'll go and have our dinner. And that's the kind of thing that really needs in person. However, it can only be done if it is safe to do so. We don't want people coming from all over the world to Glasgow when coronavirus is still out there and just as dangerous as it's been this entire time.
Of course. Now, finally, for the news this evening, Stefan, this evening we return to more news from the Kingdom of Fife, with the announcement of new jobs at the former Bifab yard. Around 290 jobs are expected to be created at the former Bifab methyl yard, after new owners, Harland and Wolff, announced that the company had won a contract to fabricate 8 platforms for wind turbines in the Nyagitha renewable energy platform in the North Sea. The platforms will provide the support for wind turbines being installed off the coast of Fife, and once completed will provide enough power for 375,000 homes. Work is expected to start in July. Now, Stefan, offshore construction projects haven't exactly enjoyed plain sailing in Scotland over the past few years. What are your hopes in light of today's announcement from Methil?
I think this is absolutely fantastic news. I think that Scotland's future is in renewable energy and will generate huge sums of money for the Scottish economy in the future, and any investment in this area is a really good thing and a major bonus, especially in my home region of Fife.
And do you think that will 290 direct jobs, will that make a difference locally?
Yeah, I think it will, and I really hope that they employ local people to do these jobs, people that are already skilled in this, and it will help the local economy, and that's always good.
It certainly has struck me over the past few years that that part of Fife was really a focus for engineering and civil engineering and construction, with the construction of the naval vessels, or the assembly of the naval vessels at Rosyth, and the construction of the Queensferry crossing, and all of the work that takes place in Methil and other locations along the coast of Fife there. Retaining those skills that have been developed with such huge construction projects, is that important? And where do you think the BIFAB yard at Methil will fit into that approach?
It is really important, and if you look at what you've just said, we've had the Queensferry crossing, we've built warships here in Rosyth. We have phenomenal skills in Fife, and I'm glad that the BIFAB, the old BIFAB area, has won this, and I really hope that it does wonders for Methil. My dad actually used to work in Methil as a police officer, and I've heard a lot of really good things about Methil, so I'm really happy that it's happened.
Well, maybe better things than when the Proclaimers sing about Methil, perhaps. But yes, I take your point about your dad's experience. Now then, Stefan, thank you very much for joining us on Scotland at 7 this evening. It's been tremendous to have you with us, and to have you sharing your thoughts and your insights with us, especially at a time when you're working and campaigning as well. So we're very grateful to you for sharing your time and coming to join us this evening.
No, I really appreciate it, Andrew. Thank you.
It's been great to see you. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. If you would like to support us, then please consider subscribing or donating to Broadcasting Scotland, and you will find the link to do that on the screen. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or in making the organisation work, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot. You'll see the URL on the screen just now, and send us a message there. Meantime, I'd like to say thanks once again to Stefan Hoggan-Radu for joining us, and wish him well for his campaigning over the next 3 weeks. And in the meantime, everyone, thank you for watching us this evening, and please have a great weekend and a great evening tonight.
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.